open the meeting. Is Reverend Nelson or if Reverend Nelson's on, how about Dan? Both of them are out of town, are unable to get here, so they're not here, and they've requested in compliance with FOIA to be able to participate in the meeting remotely. So I'll entertain a motion to allow them to participate.
Motion to approve.
Second.
In favor? Aye. All right, they're good.
Thank you.
Considerations of amendments to the agenda. Does anybody on staff or any board members have any, or committee members have any? No? All right. Public comment. Anybody here from the public to comment? Fantastic. Action items. A, who's gonna share the item?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't approve the minutes.
We don't have the minutes. Joe is out of town and I'm not sure.
All right. Well, we're gonna approve them next time. So we are at A.
Yes, we are.
Who's presenting it?
All right. This is support for the regional transportation plan, and a couple of people are on both committees, but anyway. This is the preparation for the FY27 and FY28 CVTA required plan for how we plan to spend our money. This will kick off in January, where we'll do kind of a shorter version of the plan to prepare for FY27, because the plan would go between the CVTA full authority in April so that the input could come to our board for adoption of our budget in May. And then we will be kicking off a greater effort. We're kind of going to take a step back to look at the regional efforts, all of the studies and inputs that have happened from the rurals as well as the jurisdictions on what are the regional priorities, and we'll develop an FY28 plan that will then come to our board for approval for FY28. So this total request is $275,000 for Michael Baker and Jarrett Walker to support us in the development of this plan. And it is funded with the CVTA previously approved of.
From 21, 22, and 23? Okay.
We have balances from the previous.
All right. So, are we voting to decide whether this committee is going to support that, or are you just informing us of it?
We're voting, yeah.
That's
We
right.
make a recommendation to the board as to support.
Yeah.
And this is just for the hiring of this firm to support putting together the plan, right? Okay. Motion to approve. A motion to recommend to the board for approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Right, Dan, to you. Oh, is that?
That's
No, that was just Tyrone. He said it twice. All right. All right.
Okay.
Next item.
Or you want one back up? Remember, there's a lot of tabs.
Good afternoon. I am here to talk a little bit about the approval to advance north-south BRT design from 15 to 30%. This is sort of the natural progression of our project. Began in fall of 2023. Since then, most recently, we've been working on the analysis for the project. And we're looking ahead to finishing that in the second quarter of 2026. But in order to keep momentum for the project, we need to advance design and engineering by doing a pretty significant amount of survey work along the north-south BRT corridor. It's going to involve a combination of ALTA surveys, which are with people on the ground doing the surveys in real time. It's going to involve some aerial survey for areas where we don't need the same level of detail. And then it's also going to involve some of the most detailed subsurface utility and engineering surveys. We're going to be using a combination of state, federal, and CBTA regional funds for this work, which is going to cost about $3,146,266. And as you'll see, in addition to all of the deliverables associated with the surveys themselves, we will be notifying landowners of the work to be done. When we're all done, we'll have graphics for the corridor. We'll have an opinion of probable construction cost, which is an important step. Then we'll have survey files, utility files, and geotechnical report. So we'll know if soils around the stations are suitable for the work that we need to do. We hope that the work will take about 6 to 7 months from initiation. We're hoping to have the aerial survey start in February. We have to wait for the sun to reach a specific angle before we can do that work. And hopefully this work will be completed right around the time that our NEPA analysis is complete and submitted to the FTA.
The CBTA regional money, is that the 35% pot? And they've already voted to approve that?
Yeah, that was, I think, award 2 years ago, the last cycle.
Yeah. Around
But
$8 million.
okay, so. Oh, all right, any other questions?
So, yeah, I just want to be sure I'm clear on what is region, this, when you say local region, is that the local that comes directly to?
So the locals get 50%. Our GRTC gets 15% and 35% goes to regional projects. And this is the 35% that's in the regional bucket that CVTA controls where that goes. And that was what my question was too, is to make sure that that 35% bucket is where it's coming from, and they already approved it. And it sounds like the answer to both of those is yes. So I'm good. Any other questions from anybody?
So, second question, this is a big project. And I know that we have had plenty of discussion on it. But when we look at the budget, are we looking at phases of the budget? Are we looking at a total budget with phases and knowing where we are in the total budget itself?
So if you, I guess, go through the project schedule, you have let's go to the next page. This is kind of a dual conversation for approval for this. So we came to you guys in fall 2023, which is that 4th grade bullet, to approve basically the alignment, which at that point was to go from Virginia Center Commons all the way to Chesterfield Town Center to the mall. That was the approval. And then as we work through it and refined it and work with jurisdictions, that is pared back to just across the on Chamberlain, just across the border in Henrico, and then stopping at the Chesterfield border. So if you go to the next page on the map, that's the alignment. But we are looking at that, as you just asked, in 3 phases. So as far as I call it the phase 1, which is from the Henrico line to the transfer hub downtown. And then from the transfer hub to Southside Plaza being the 2nd phase. And then the 3rd being from here all the way to Chesterfield, that map that you have right there, sorry. Yeah, all the way to Spring Line would be kind of the 3rd phase. It's
So are there budgets associated with the faces as well?
So we are looking at it as an overall budget. So we're going to engineer for all of it. So we are requesting funds for 18 million, and we'll get to that later with the grant cycle for beyond the 30%. We're applying for DRPT merit applications for that. So this is up, what we're asking now, going over is up to the 30%. As far as construction funds, knowing the number for that full 12 point whatever miles is almost $400 million. We are going to go after segments. So we'll apply for phase one, which, as I said, to the transfer hub. And the next one being to basically the GRTC property would be that phase two, basically Southside Plaza. And so if we were to get those funds first, that was what we would want to implement. So the last priority would be from here to Spring Line. And we're going to still apply, but that as far as a readiness doesn't seem like it's as ready as the other two parts of the project.
I think where Ellen might be going, because part of that is how do you get it up front, but then how do you fund it going forward after that? What are the operations
Well,
that look?
hey, I think that's one of the biggest, I mean, we all read the papers around here, and our comments and our coordination with them is the one that I'm most concerned about, is that we're saying, while it's a long ways away, 6 years down the line, we fall off of a financial cliff, but we're not making any in line in session adjustments with our planning. And so I don't think we can talk out of both sides of our mouth. We got to pick one. What is our plan for, moving forward? I think I was very, loud and in support of staff at the last meeting that I think we've done a great thing by putting away funds and leveraging the CVTA funds for the future to be able to carry forward these activities. But while doing that, we can't continue to make, additional obligations if there's no plan, especially if we're going to speak about it that way. I think I'll close with this. I mean, the process is to go after grants, but I think the conversation is really just been a squeeze on the local contribution and it being reduced, when I think we all know, I ain't been here long, so if I know it, everybody know it, that the local contribution has been reduced because the CVTA funds are now in place. So I think I'm concerned about, one, our messaging, and two, making sure that we communicate in the same way that we're making decisions. I heard very clearly a plan around budget and going after additional grants to be able to go off and get these funds. It's normal. That's how we do things. But we can't say that and then also say we falling off a cliff in 6 years. That doesn't work. That looks crazy, and it makes the municipalities and these local governments who are supporting look crazy too. So one, I don't care for it, but two, I think we have to make sure we do that the right way. So
Right now, though, everything we're looking at that you're looking for approval is to get design done.
That's right.
Necessarily implement it. But before we pull the trigger on construction, I think you're absolutely right. But getting it designed, I'm not, I'm okay on that side.
I'm ready. We had this conversation similarly in the meeting before this, and I voted it up. But in the finance committee meeting, we talked everything we do. We talking about finance, so I'm gonna make sure every time before I raise my hand to vote, I'm very clear on my position on that. Because while I had a conversation with staff, and I think y'all are clear that very much in support, definitely believe we made the right fiscal positions, but very much not in support of our messaging or lack thereof that gives the impression that we're not prepared for a rainy day, because that's completely the opposite of where we are. And so I'll voice my displeasure at every turn on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can just jump in, I want to double down on what Mr. Donald shared. I mean, I've shared the similar comments probably for this entire year, but definitely whenever I see stories that put it out there, like we're missing all of the good stuff, like all of the, and I don't think that's our media department's fault at all, but there's so many different stories to tell about what we're doing good. But it seems like every other story about GRTC has something to do with us and money and having shortfalls. And even yesterday when we were at or the day before yesterday, whenever the CBTA was, Finance Committee, I guess that was yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah,
It
even I, as I listened to the presentation as also the chair of the CBTA, it's confusing. And so it's as a locality representative, I'm trying to figure out, so what is GRTC saying to us? GRTC. And if the CBTA money is going to run out, then I'm assuming ultimately at the end of the day, the localities are going to wave their hands, jump up and say, hey, we got it, because we know how important free fare is to our community, and we don't want to deal with the backlash that comes from that. But you also have people within the construct of the localities that are reading this. They're not a part of our meetings. They don't understand our forecasting. And they see a story from 2 weeks ago that says 6 years, y'all are zero. So that's stressing them out. And then you have your administrators, trying to explain, like, because of the taxing structure, the localities are already contributing X, Y, Z with the money. So, I don't know. I don't know who creates the narrative for the stuff that goes out, but I think we need to revisit it, because it is. I feel internally it's probably confusing members of the board, and also I think it's creating probably unnecessary at this moment consternation, fear, stress, and worry about GRTC. Because the question I get is, well, why y'all keep on adding stuff if you don't have no money, if you're not gonna have money? Like that doesn't make sense. So these are things that we're hearing outside of the GRTC bill.
So I think, we've spoken about this on different occasions, and trying to put it in a process and reporting that is simplistic enough that everyone can follow it. And we can share it, I can share it with other members of council and others to make sure that we're clear that we have done what we need to do to be in a position that we put forth the reserve funds and so forth, and that we aren't at this cliff. But are we getting this full package before the finance committee meeting, that all of these attached documents and so forth?
Yeah, we
We
did.
sent that out.
We got this
early,
time, yeah.
Yeah.
We did
Our
get
goal is to get it to at least 2 days in advance, if not 3. And this came out on Tuesday.
Yeah, I got this one. I'm curious about the timing of that though. Why is it so close to before the meeting? What is the thought behind that? Why don't we do it a little earlier than that?
It's just gathering off all of the information and making sure we have everything that we're gonna bring to the board for that month.
I guess just the concern about that for me would be, so if you give it to us, yeah, I'll give you an example that sit on this committee with the counselor. And so if we get it on Tuesday and then we're back here on Thursday, Ms. Tyrona is our staffer and she has to dissect this information, brief us on it. Well, with our schedules, that doesn't work. And so we're coming into the meetings a little unprepared to make decisions. So some of these are no brainers. We make them and move forward. But I think you have a good brain, and everybody else here, I think we all got great brains. So, but some of them are easy. Just a little. This brain been through a lot now. But I do think that I'm gonna always push. In the city of Richmond, what I have noticed, at least in our local government, there's a push for excellence at every turn, and the expectations are high. And so I think it's fair for us to have those here as well. And so 2 days is not enough time to review that information, especially when all of these folks who are part of the board, the committees and all of that also have, additional responsibilities and things. So I'm gonna formally ask as a part of this committee that we get this information sooner than that.
And because of that conversation.
So I will acknowledge for sure the improvements, because just from my first meeting to this one, no issues whatsoever with the improvement, but
I hear you, but
service excellence is a key, and I'm looking for the services that I receive to continue. Yeah.
absolutely, that's our goal.
Especially
Yes.
if you have weather on Friday and then you have weather on Monday.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna tell you, yeah, that's
You
right.
gotta catch up from all that, and then you gotta be ready for today. That doesn't make it.
Yeah, but same with us though.
I know.
Monday.
Trying to
I'll say there's one difference, is that while this is an additional activity for most of these board members, juggling it all is what you do 100% of the time. So it's a fair expectation that this be a part of getting that information early. So I'm gonna support you fully, but I ain't gonna let you off the hook.
No, not expecting you
Just
to.
so you know, for the county, we usually have somewhere between 7 to 10 days before our board meeting to understand what's going to be on our agenda, so we can.
Say that again?
7 to 10 days.
We usually have 7 to 10 days before our board meeting, which would be like your city council meeting.
It's similar at the
To
council.
get the agenda and to really digest what's on the agenda, to be able to have time to ask questions and to be able to, I know that's not where we've been. I'm just saying that is what we're doing at the local level.
Yeah, so
Friday, so if we get to that Friday, not the Friday before, but the Friday before.
yeah, I think that's fair.
That's almost a week.
Yeah, and I would say, and this is a bigger conversation for the board as a whole, but I do think a week at minimum is what is needed, because you're dealing with everybody who's on your board is some sort of executive, community leader, counselor, whatever it is, and so the other responsibilities that they have for their other committees, their board activities, whatever it is required and responsible. So a week makes sense to me. I don't want to speak on behalf of all the other board members, but I think if it's less than a week, that becomes a challenge for us to be able to support you in the way you need.
Yeah. I think we can, because we want to be able to close things too from the previous month, so that might give us enough time to do that.
In this item, we're talking about funding the construction side, or the document side of it, not the construction
right.
side of it. I do think if we get to the end of all of those documents and we're talking about pulling the trigger, those other conversations definitely need to be more in play. But right now, I'm okay personally with funding the study.
A motion to move this forward, Mr. Chair, with the recommendation for approval to the full board, with the understanding that we need to try to get as much of these documents, not only to the committee, but also to the board in advance, because that's what, we're making recommendations today, Thursday, and the board meeting is 8:00 Tuesday morning.
Yeah. So I'm gonna assume, so one, I will second that and allow us to move it forward. While we'll have the advantage of having this information, in advance of that meeting, I would encourage us to, and I'm out of order. Is it okay to have discussion?
It's part of your motion. You're good. I'm fine.
I would just ask that, I would say with the approval, and I know you got to do the minutes and everything else, but I would encourage you to share this information with the full board as early as today, so that, they're getting that information in advance.
And that is the goal. So the information from the committee meetings will be part of the board packet. And so they will have that, and that will go out once everything is agreed upon here, then Janice is ready to send that out to the full board.
All right.
Yes.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right,
See, we also have-
MOU for CBTA Regional Fund.
Yes, so that is, accompanies the one we just did. That is the regional funds that we just acknowledged that the city received from CBTA for the 15%. We are requesting to use about 1.4 million as the local match for both the current effort, but also the one that you just approved to the 0 and to the 30%.
But this says Richmond, but it's really, it's the regional, no, because this is the 15%. This is the city did we just
We can't
asked
do the
them to sponsor
application.
that. But it's still out of the 15% that's designated to come to GRTC anyways.
Whatever, that's right. So I literally, in our meeting before this, I got a great explanation on it. So it is.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that this wasn't
That's
CBTA dollars out of Richmond's 50%.
that's the same. It's the same set of questions. So this is, that was very helpful, but it does harp on the need to get that information sooner, because instead of asking in the committee meeting, we would have been asking our staff person to help us explain it. So, and that, again, I think it's helpful. I, motion so moved to move forward. And, Mr. Chair, again, I make a motion to approve.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Sure.
We may have some additional changes once we take it to our attorney's office to approve the form, so just be aware of
The dollar amounts won't change though, right?
No.
All right, I'm fine with that.
Just the language. Potentially.
Are you looking for my signature?
All right, where we at? Resolutions for FY 25 annual report.
Not yet, after Tuesday.
A resolution for FY 25 annual report.
Yes.
You would highlight.
It's in the packet, but we'll provide you with the actual annual report at the board meeting on Tuesday, a hard copy. But we're just asking for a resolution of support to support the accomplishments that we highlighted in.
Support the accomplishment or support the report?
The report. Yes, support the report that highlights the accomplishments. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
We do
Yes.
support all the positive accomplishments.
Yes,
We
thank
do
you.
support that.
Thank you. Yes, so yeah.
And it's
that is
good to
the-
share that with the rest of the world.
Yes, that's exactly right. So that's what this resolution of support is for.
Any questions?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, what do we got? GRTC conference room improvement, change order.
So this is, again, we brought the request to, earlier this year to improve all the conference rooms in the building, new technology. As we've gone through, we found some improvements, enhancements that we can do with some of the rooms that we have. So this is a change order to that initial request for about $27,000 that will enhance kind of what the build out and implementation to give us some additional things we can do in some of the areas.
And
It's 80% funded federally.
so we're funding 30,000 out of GRTC and 80, in the,
No, the change order is only for $27,000. But the total project, that is.
yeah, well, the total project's 128. Now, the total project, we're funding, about 31,000-ish. But the new request is the 5,000 and the 22,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Anybody have any questions?
So the change amount is what? 27?
27,
618.
618, 69. That page right there, yeah.
I see.
It's the top line, yeah.
Oh. That change order is covered.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion to approve. Motion to
Second.
recommend approval.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. John, I guess you're up.
All right. So on the screens at each end and also in the handout is the financial report for the 4 months ending October 31st. So you'll probably the first thing, the presentation is a bit different than in the past. We've been working to try to refresh the slides based upon feedback to try to still maintain some of the tables and the traditional financial statements, but also to try to use bar charts, stack bar charts, pie charts, and so forth, so that we can incorporate something for everybody in there. So there's a lot of redundancy, but different people. Some people are tattlers, some people are accountants like me that need to see financial statements. We're trying to put it in a medium that multiple people with different views could understand. So for okay.
Moving.
Hold on. There we go. You had to wake up, I think. All right, so I'll talk off of this. This right here on the second page of the presentation is the pie chart. So on the left, this is our revenue summary for 4 months. On the left is the pie chart of the budget, which is 35.953 million. And the actual revenues that were booked through the 4 months of October are 34.507. So revenues are below budget by about 3.69%. So looking at the categories, and that's why it's a little busy, I apologize, but I want to include not only just the percentages, but also the truncated millions of dollars, because a pie chart basically just shows the components, the relative percentages of one item. So if you look at this, so we have a below budget variance of $1.3 million. So where is that $1.3 million coming? So if we look at the orange pie slice, that's on municipal funding. So the budget for the municipal funding through 4 months was 7.2 million, which represents about 20% of the adopted budget. In the $34.5 million number, the actual revenues from the municipal was 5.6 million. So you see it's a shortfall of about 1.667 million, which makes the pie slice only 16% of the total actual. What is in there in our fiscal 2026 adopted budget? In this municipal funding, this is the operating contributions from Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield, Petersburg, as well as the budget also had the assumption that GRTC was using its prior surpluses plus its earned interest in the tune of $5 million per year, or roughly 166,000 a month, times 4 months is $1.6 million. So the budget shortfall primarily entirely is due to the funding portion coming out of GRTC's surplus. So we're not going to have a revenue to report theoretically. We're just going to be using the cash and surplus out of our fund balance. Looking at the others, so if you're looking at totality, why is the actual revenue below budget? It's due to the assumption where we're funding from our reserves. Looking at the other pieces, regional.
We're not funding from our reserves. We're funding from money we deferred from our reserves.
Correct.
Deferred to our reserve.
Deferred.
Well, that we deferred.
That's right.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if somebody else was listening, that they understand. It sounds like we're using our reserves up, and we're not. We're using money that we specifically set aside that was left over from last year to fund this.
And so but I think that's important because our
It's
messaging has not been good on this matter at all. And these are decisions. I said it on the probably should have waited until we got here, but I want to be very clear. I think I said every time there's an opportunity, I'm gonna harp on that, is that we made a conscious decision, which I think is an appropriate and appropriately frugal one that shows fiscal restraint and responsibility, that we are going to, not spend these funds on that come in through this format, and we're gonna use these first, kind of like the federal FIFO method, first in, first out, and so now these funds are readily available for us to continue to deliver at the level of service that we decided. What might be helpful though is if we're also, when we're communicating to board members, including myself, is that we let them know about that choice that is being made and that ultimately the board members are making. Because this is at least from what I can tell, staff is taking this position. I think it's the right one. I would support it, vote for it, all of those things. But it is kind of a staff level decision. The opposite, which should also be presented to board members, is that, hey, you can reduce service. Excuse me if I'm kicking somebody, but you can, reduce service. You can alter service. You can do other things and decide to administer these funds differently. We provide fare free. I'm a huge proponent of fare free transit, but that's me. Others may say, hey, maybe we don't do fare free transit, or we don't do fare free transit throughout the system. And if we did that, that alters the mix and makes more funds available. So when we communicate that, I think we're only sharing, or at least in the 2 meetings I've been in, we're only sharing what we're doing based on the current plan. I'd imagine to board members, it would be helpful to know, hey, we could do something different. If we decided to only fund this portion of the system for fare free, then it means we have X amount of millions of dollars left. But it also means that the connectivity from Richmond to Henrico or Chesterfield or wherever is altered. And so I think that's something that I would ask for as well. So I don't think it stops the show for today, but I also don't want you to be surprised when you hear these comments in a more public forum at our board meeting, because you will surely hear them.
Yeah, so the 5,033,000 that's part of the 26 adopted budget came about that way. That's what we're talking about at the June meeting. It was originally 4.1 million, and then we had a discussion about adding back the frequency on one of the routes, which added the additional
funds. Yep, I think that was my first meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we can work on the wording on that and so forth, but that was the intention of doing that. And you're absolutely right. The funding from that comes from unspent monies from the fiscal 25 plus.
That we didn't put into the surplus, we budgeted into this year.
Rolled it forward, yes.
And I just think that that's important, because when you say it's from the reserves, to somebody that doesn't know that, it sounds like we're eating down all our reserves, which is why we might fall off of a cliff in 6 years. And that's not what we're doing here.
The accounting definition of it, because as you close out the year.
I know, that's why we ask for, I understand that the accountant says things that are legal and technical, and board members want to have discussions that our citizens understand and can follow.
Speaking of, I know we're showing like our year-to-date numbers and all of those things. What is the position? I guess this is more for board members as far as seeing what our projected expenditures are, so that we're able to know where we'll end up.
Okay.
Is that
We'd usually do that next, right?
You're looking for the full year forecast.
That's right. Yeah.
We put that together while we start doing the budget for the initial stances of the fiscal 27 budget. So when we get in, we are 4 months in. So our goal when we come to January, we'll be providing an outlook for fiscal 26 as to where we think the year will end.
Got it. But what about so what you do is, but after 4 months, I'm sure you're able to say, like right now, because I just did this for the council, we're spending on average about $84 million a month. And we've got 3 or 4 projected activities that are coming forward. And so I can tell them, hey, based on this $84 million a month that we're spending, of course you get your 30 days after the closeout of the month, but the goal is, and look, I have been pretty open about our fiscal stuff has to be improved, so we're not all the way there. But the goal is that after we close that out, that holds true for 4 months, and we're projected to do 2 or 3 large projects that are general fund funded at later in the year. I can tell us whether we're going to have a surplus or whether we're going to be over, or what it looks like, or if we need additional infusion into the system. I mean, I think that's something, I don't see that, so I'm just curious as to, is that in the?
Well, they do
4 months.
tell us like we're 5 million, sorry, below the budget on expenditures right now, and we are 1.4 under on revenue, so that's a 3.5 or 4
Surplus, about
surplus where we are right now. So, to your point though, what is missing here is there a big expenditure that is coming, or the timing's off enough that it could cause us some concern? And
Oh, not
Yeah,
that one.
no.
yeah, so what I'm saying is that they are telling us where our position is today, and they've done that pretty well and pretty accurate, but they aren't really saying right now we're projecting based on what we've done, what we've seen, and what we have to come, that we're gonna end at a certain place, and that's what he's asking for additional info.
Yeah.
It's just a projection on where we'll end.
Like I said, we usually do that in January. It's just we haven't done it at the 4 months before.
Got it. Which is what I'm
So-
looking.
But we can.
How
Something
much,
we can't do.
I think Reverend Nelson has.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So are we, okay, so we look at the budget for the year, whatever the budget revenue expenses are. Are we at a point now, well, I would assume based upon what we've been reading and seeing, we are now expenses over revenue in our budget.
No.
So then how are we dipping into our reserves if we're not in the red? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. So when you look at, if you go to I want to talk to the chart on the expense side. So looking on this chart on the summary, it's page number 4 in the packet.
Are we doing it for continuity of being able to have cash flow to make payments? Because it's not steady. So sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but we need to have that in there to have a balance so that we can make our payroll. Okay.
So on this page here, looking at the operating expenditures, we're below budget by 5.375 million. So the biggest contributor to that is services. This is our operating grant studies, and we're talking about like North-South, BRT, the Western Extension, Downtown Transfer Center. There were operating grants that are budgeted. So what that is, that's consultancy monies where we approved for Kinley-Horn, Michael Baker and Jarrett Walker and Kinley-Horn. So some of those projects, the timeline slide. So when we put the budget together, after it gets adopted by the board, we calendarize it. We put a, kind of an expense curve throughout the 12 months, how we think they're going to hit. And what happens is that a lot of these projects kind of slow down a little bit. So that we're expecting expenses to hit in July, a level of expenses in July, August, and September. They haven't hit yet. What we tend to see is we get a large bolus of these funds at the end of the year. So case in point, in July, August, and September, we saw a lot of expenses that were related to these projects from April, February, March, April, that were accrued in the prior year. Now we hit this lull again, so then it will go. So right now, of the surplus of the budget, $5.3 million being below budget, the good chunk of it is those consultancies, which is about 3.6 million. Also in there, labor is significant, is a key expense. These drivers are broken down by the functional area. So equipment and facility maintenance is 870,000 favorable, and that's due to favorable costs for bus parts, meaning the the timing of the demand. It's kind of hard to determine when breakdowns or when the parts are going to be needed and pulled out of inventory and expensed. It's also, there's favorable expenses on the tires and tubes. That's a function of, the replacement of the tires that are leased. So that is favorable, and it's offset a little bit by unfavorable fuels, which nets to the 870,000 plus the equipment and facilities maintenance labor is a little bit favorable.
Which is also funny because you said leased, but we're buying the tires even though
There's
the term is leased.
Right.
So there's an expense for based upon we don't take the title.
I'm just saying that the average person, if they heard you say we're leasing tires, would say you're crazy. Like, you don't lease tires. But that is the accounting term for it, which is also honestly ridiculous, but that's.
So in the general and administrative expenses is favorable by 1 million, and this is primarily due to headcount vacancies. And also in the transportation operators, the labor is, in the vehicle operations, labor is favorable, $755,000. And that's basically due to headcount. So at the end, the combination of fixed route and microtransit, the actual FTE 40 in the budget's 368.5.
So I think where we're at, I think this reporting we get pretty well. But I think Mr. Donald's, which hasn't been brought up for us, I think great point from him, is that not only should we get the net operating position of where we are for the year right now, but we should also get a projected operating position for the end of the year. Now, Adrian said that we were going to get that in January after 4 months are in. It might make a better projection with 4 months in, so maybe we tolerate it for the first 4 months and then we start getting the projected year in.
And you gotta have a point in which you stabilize your spending. You get the 4 months, you verify that, you know which big expenditures you're gonna have and things of that nature. So I would be perfectly fine with that, but I do think I'm responsible for doing it with the city, and we're trying to shore up to get there as well. And so, we expect the same thing.
So one of the, if you look at it, I'll give another pie chart. So our 68% of our operating expenses are human capital related, or their staff and benefits. So a lot of that is volatile based upon ins and outs. That's one piece. So what we have traditionally done is that as we get into, reporting 6 months, that's when we start having communications with finance. Our outlook is to have a surplus. During my tenure here, we haven't had a deficit, so we haven't had to not acknowledge.
Well, if we get a deficit, that's going to be a problem.
Right. Well, like we call out the areas.
We don't need to be way the other direction either, but a deficit is more of a problem than a surplus of 4 or 5.
So like in the certain expense categories, such as like the property and casualty insurance, how it's currently, its expenses are exceeding the budget. And part of that is due to, as Kevin was reporting in the operation, we have more incidents. We also have, we had to make adjustments to the provision. There were a couple of significant accidents that had liability that would take us up to make the provision up to our self-insured retention level of $350,000. So that has driven that on payroll. In addition, because we had significant hiring in operators and microtransit years, we've had additional workers' compensation premium adjustments. What they do is when they come in and you provide your budget, and then they come back in and audit the payroll 2 years later, and they see that you went from 225 people and maybe the budget was 250. Now you're at a level of 325. There's catch-up premium. So there was that also goes through the property casualty line item as well. And then the other line item is the purchase transportation, as we were talking about, earlier with the paratransit analysis through WeDriveU. As the consultant had identified that the cost of that have gone up 79% since 2017. For the last 2 or 3 years, we've increased the budget, but the demand is there for the Care Plus, and all the other enhanced. So that cost, we have been not able to budget to the level that we end up seeing. So Of the two items that are,
There are variances in what is projected as your budget. So you start off with a budget for the year, projection of what you're gonna spend in all of these different categories and all that. So if there's quarterly reports on the budget and they're or quarterly or 4 months, whatever, we're agreeing to, if there are variances from the projected budget to a certain degree, footnotes, I mean, the dialogue that we're having is perfect because it helps us to appreciate why there are variances. But, one of the other boards that I serve on that is a regional board as well, if there's certain level of variances, there's a footnote to the budget that just give an explanation for that. And that just helps you when you're looking at it. I know exactly why this variance is there. Now, that's not every variance, but a variance over a certain dollar amount gets a footnote.
so we can,
What the key drivers?
yeah, on that, we're trying to, what we can do though is like, in the narrative, so I don't think that the unfavorable expense variance on paratransit is going to correct back down to zero. So to Mr. Donald's point is that as we put it together, we can put our spending to we'll forecast that we're expecting the variance to be unfavorable for paratransit line to be X dollars. And likewise, for the insurance, we true up the provision on a quarterly basis. So we can project and say, I don't think that negative variance is going to go away. However, we can quantify, obviously, we have a budgeted authorized headcount in operators and microtransit. If we have the favorability in the bank now, we're not going to hire 50 over. So we can say that favorable labor from operations is in the bank to offset the two negatives. That's how, when we look at it, we believe that we will not be in a deficit where expenses exceed revenues at the end of fiscal 26. We expect probably to be neutral to positive of a surplus, given that the labor variances, and we have significant labor variances in the G&A section as well. And one of the things that, there is some, the difficulty in some of the revenues is the projects. The North-South BRT, the consultancies, because I don't necessarily know the full magnitude of what's coming in until like July, August, September. Inputs is all roll in, and then we're working on, in our process of doing the quarterly NPRs, getting better forecasting so we can see what's out there and incorporate it in. But there's still work to be done there to improve that. So we can channel as much of that information into here. What we could probably do is add a column to Mr. Donald's point. We can put, we show, case in point, I'll just, on this schedule here, this is the income statement. So you can see here, there's the current month in the left, and then the year-to-dates in the middle, and then we have the fiscal 26 annual budget. We can put another column to the right and kind of put, call it our outlook, our fiscal 26 out, or estimated actual. We could use a term like that, and we could trap those numbers in, and what you would see kind of coming down here in the operating expense categories where we have purchase service spec trend right now of 327,000 unfavorable to budget. We can extrapolate and say we're expecting that to be unfavorable X dollars. On the flip side, we can see maintenance and transportation, those are both favorable. We can say that we're extrapolating those to be favorable, so we can show at that point in time each month, net, we think we're going to be, $500,000 favorable or neutral.
Yeah.
And we could add that to that schedule to provide that clarity. Case in point, some of the, when you look at this, like Barb Smith West, but you look at the Chesterfield operating contribution line, it's unfavorable 31,679. Someone says like, well, you send them, the quarterly operating contributions, are they not paying? No, this is the component of their DRPT grant for the Route 1A. The Route 1A budget was $2,190,000, which is like $180,000 a month. And they're actually, based upon the incremental revenue miles, they're averaging about $150,000 a month in billing. So that's why they're unfavorable, because we thought that the service level would be higher for the reimbursements to VDOT. So that's in there. That's kind of we have I think you've raised that point. There's a lot of different things that are mixed in that make it difficult. So like on here, I would probably project that the Chesterfield will be a little unfavorable, and it's a function of the Route 1A. It's not achieving the ridership levels that we had originally contemplated in preparing the budget. So I could go through that, and then we could talk off of that, and show some of the
Revenue miles, not the ridership.
I'm sorry, revenue miles. I like to go on rush, no. So at this point, in going back to this summary of where we are, so you can see here on the revenue side, the 1,446,000 is less than the share on the first bullet point. The local funds is the 1,000,006, of which was the fiscal 25 revenue that we carried forward into 26. So we're not going to invoice ourselves. So that basically is the reason why those revenues are down. And in perspective in the P&L, you can see that right here in the budget, the operating contribution GRTC fund balance is the 1,000,670. So that you see how that rolls up. That's basically making the transaction, and that will be $5,033,000 for the year. So this, our items that we're watching are paratransit, the casualty from the provision for losses. In addition, we had I think it was about $108,000 true up for the workers' comp premiums, which basically impacts primarily the equipment and facility maintenance and transportation line item. Other items in here. So going through some of the other schedules that we have in here, this is kind of a different perspective. So let me explain this one. So this is a bar chart here. This is the different revenues. So you see the blue, you got the state revenues. So this one here is, it's in the middle, you see the percentage, 31%. That's 31% of the budgeted revenue. So just to put in perspective, and then the CBTA, which is the regional funds, is 29% of the total. So you can see that the state revenues, the 11,151,000, that is what the budget amount was, and we're slightly below. Why are we below that? Because in that state dollar amount is the CMAQ revenues of $2 million. Those funds are not available until January 1st. However, we calendarized about $1 million of it in the first 6 months. So that's why that's off. So right there is about $300,000. So if you do 2 million divided by 12 times 4, you get that number. The second column, CBTA, it's green, it's favorable. It's about $100,000 favorable. That's the local share match on the project. So when we have PM and ADA, we put those through in the months of July, August, and September. The 2% match of that is compartmentalized. I expect that to go back down to normal, to the budget level. The federal is it's favorable about 100,000 as well, and that's due to the timing of the PM and the ADA submissions for those 5307 funds. The purple, Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield, you guys are pretty much on. Richmond's it's favorable. And that's an anomaly. That's the share of all those PM funds. We just lump them into Richmond because it's the largest. They're about 66% of the local contribution. Our accounting system only allows us to charge it to once we allocate the local costs to Richmond. You see the Chesterfield. It's got the
last part again.
So when we have the grants for the federal, state, and grants, our general ledger system, we have a federal piece, a state piece, and a local. The local is the split between Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield and CBTA. So just for the categories to put in the P&L, I put all the local contribution revenue into Richmond and slight. So because we only have one code, I don't have a local Chesterfield, I don't have a local Henrico. So our system, our chart of accounts limited. So like I said, the Chesterfield has a little red on top. That's due to the 1A. And then Petersburg, the 66,666, that's on budget. And then the column on the right is showing the GRTC fund balance. So this was kind of try to replace the red, yellow, green. It's kind of hard to do, but this is kind of like taking a pie chart combined with the red, yellow, green, and a stack bar. So it was I'll give credit to my FP&A manager for putting this together as an alternate way to show it.
So John, I think the others are just
Yeah.
emphasizing what we've already
Right.
covered. Unless anybody has any questions, we're gonna. Questions?
I'm good. Anybody else have any questions?
No, I'm good.
You said no more.
Well, that's what I saw that made me wonder how to project further out. So I'm wondering, I know at this point,
So many different.
probably couldn't because this is looking back. I'm like,
This is this one. Okay.
Okay.
get for my time. Oh. and then 28, not 30, take one.
Or you think we're gonna skip 7 and 8, or do you think we're gonna try to come back to them?
We just don't want to take up so long.
On the agenda.
So we should be at 7, but we're gonna skip to 9.
Yeah, we're gonna skip. Yeah.
We're gonna skip over to 9,
Policy discussion.
policy discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. All right, I have a few handouts today I'm gonna actually take back since they're very much just workshop drafts for us to start conversation with some estimate numbers.
John, I think John has.
I can get it.
Thank you.
Okay. This is kind of we've had a lot of conversation on, kind of the cost share model through the retreat. And then in the last development committee last month, there was a new business for us to go back and look at some alternatives of coming up with kind of a cost share policy that the board could adopt as we get inquiries for new expansion service. We know that we did some expansion in FY 25 primarily, and those are being grant funded now, but we know those also come off. This is kind of a catch up for those. But we've had conversation with some of the rural jurisdictions as well as even, for example, Henrico, we're looking at doing a grant application for a route on Parham. So just want to have a policy set as we have those conversations of whether it's kind of 100% that these new services come in covered by the jurisdictions that we're talked to, or is it 50%? Is it 30%? So what this does, the first one here is the first one. Yeah, that's right. You open it up. The first one is just I'll have you guys switch actually to the back one, the draft GRTC cost share policy for service expansion. The last one in the packet, if it's all in order. All right, so purpose of this, just like I said, to establish a fair and sustainable funding framework for expansion service, whether you're a jurisdiction or we get requests from businesses as well to extend additional miles for service, so that we can formally establish a policy benefiting from the expanded service and proportionally, equitably for the kind of the cost share. So we were going to look at in terms of the cost allocation piece for operating costs to be covered, capital costs, as well as administrative costs being the three that are looked at. And in that, we would, of course, set up a formal funding agreement, which is also a draft of that in the policy, with the jurisdiction that would be looked at annually once it's established. Let's say, and I have some examples, we set on kind of what the cost for the service would be, do the planning exercise for it, what it would be to run on an annual basis, and then whatever the amount that they would fund towards it, that would be part of that particular MOU, and will be revisited every year. So it's pretty general, but in terms of for equity, just having it all be the same. So if you go to the next page.
Basically, it's, oh, go ahead.
Because if we talking about doing it equitably, we're having separate, look like these are separate MOUs or whatnot per jurisdiction, but each jurisdiction is going to manage and contributes differently. And so if we're talking about equality, which is what this is set up as, that means everybody gets an agreement. If we're talking about equity, you would look at it and say, okay, Richmond uses the system this way and has funded it in this manner. Chesterfield does it that way, Henrico does it that way, and everybody would see how much they are contributing into the pot and what their return on investment is. If you separate it, it's easier for y'all, true, but it's not equity. That's equality. That means, hey, I got a good deal over here, and this is how I'm gonna do it, and this is what I'm negotiating, but seeing that there's X amount being put into the pot, I think all parties would want to see that, because from the Richmond point of view, as the only group I speak for, we want to know, like, our focus is definitely on fear-free service and making sure, you know, our residents who live in Richmond and work elsewhere have access to those areas and can also navigate Richmond. But we also want to make sure that other jurisdictions are paying their fair share, et cetera. And so having separate MOUs isn't something that I would be excited about. I defer to the counselor to see if she has a different opinion, but I would want to see all of those pieces together.
So I thought that the reason why they were looking at 3 MOUs is because the dollar amounts are gonna be different because, we're only talking about expansion right now, right?
This is just.
If it's something that all the jurisdictions agree on, say it's going all the way from Chesterfield to Henrico through Richmond, that's gonna be a different discussion than if, say the councilwoman says, hey, I need this route in my district in the city and I really want this, that's gonna be, but it's not going outside of it. That's gonna be different. And I think that these MOUs are to, what Chesterfield, I think, was looking for was clarity on exactly how much money GRTC is looking for from each jurisdiction for expansion so that we can budget that properly or say, no, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I'm not against it. I like that portion and that ability, but I'm looking at how we budget and how we finance things here. We're not just charging $800 for the Pulse and $1,200 for Route 92 and $700 for Route 6. It is all going into a pot for the most part. And while those expansions might be specific to jurisdiction, there's still administrative costs that aren't split out and other activities. I guess that's where I'm saying it's like we're trying to create multiple types of budget activities within one effort. If the full cost of the expansion is being carried by that jurisdiction, I'd likely not have an issue for it. But if those costs are being parceled out, even if it's the administrative cost, if another group is paying a portion of that, then it would make sense to have joint. It's just my opinion. You can disagree with it.
I do think that how it's expanding and what the purpose of the expansion is makes a difference in how it gets proportioned out to pay for.
So let me make sure I'm clear on expansion. Expansion is an extension of something that is already in place. That's one thing.
Or a new route.
Expansion is new, totally new. That's a different thing. And I think for us talking about expansion for new services, what typically happens is when, unless it's just a plain contract, I mean, we've done contracts before, like we'll just, one of the localities want to do something special. And so they just contract that service. It's not necessarily part of the regional program, right? And you all negotiate the terms of cost or whatever it's going to be, and that's what the board will support or not support a contract service. An MOU, as it relates to expansion of our regional transit service and understanding what membership of that region is and the representation of the board or of that jurisdiction as it relates to them being part of the regional initiative it's become a whole different kind of conversation. So, because now you're trying to look at an equitable way by which all participating jurisdictions are contributing to the overall costs for the regional plan. And it gets complicated when regions start saying, okay, what is my return on my investment? How much am I investing and what is my return? And that can become very problematic or difficult to measure.
Dr. Nelson, you're not on mute.
Yeah,
I
sorry,
mean, not Dr. Nelson.
sorry about that, but I do have a comment after the councilwoman.
Okay.
So and create for us as a board to start talking about MOUs without having a regional conversation with the potential partners that may be interested in how to make this happen, or us as we currently exist, is a big conversation that really has lots of moving parts. And for us, you know, Nelson, myself, and others that are serving on these regional boards are looking at, you know, formulas and processes of how we do this. Recognize that this requires a lot of dialoguing and communication as to whether or not we're ready to do what. And I appreciate the recommendation that you all have been responsive to what the board has requested.
Yeah,
But before it goes public
Yeah.
and people be looking at this without us having a discussion, I think it's necessary.
And I was gonna say, this is as a result of this conversation you brought up during the board
Yes,
retreat.
yeah.
So this is our first stab at it. And that's why we said we would collect those after this meeting, because it's not official. It was
Right.
just a recommendation for us. So you-
Before I mix it in.
Yeah, and there's no percent sitting there. This is all just very much a template, but yeah, it did come out of new business from the last meeting, but it's so right now we have new service requests coming in, people who want to apply for jurisdictions who want to apply for grant applications. Those are due February 1st. We have those major grants that applications we talked about earlier, North-South BRT. In the committee meeting before this, they talked about us doing MOUs with the jurisdictions. For example, I'm going to use Henrico doing the Western Extension. If we're applying for whatever the grant might be for the construction, we still need to have an MOU in place with that jurisdiction on the potential of the additional funding now, even though it's not happening for maybe 5 years. So these are things that we don't want to move forward with, but also we are a regional entity, like you said, and we are being approached by the region for service. Do we say, no, we can't do it because we can't take on more expansion? Or is there a cost share model that we can put in place that we review every year maybe it's just for the grant cycle and we keep reviewing it as it goes on? Or is it, as Mr. Donald said, is it a service agreement, or one of you said it, a service agreement where anyone who's not on the governance effort of the board itself, they have to do service agreements, which is just how Henrico used to be, because Henrico County was not on the board. Point to him, Henrico County was not on the board. We had a service agreement with them where they would pay dollar for dollar. Chesterfield was a little different. They still did that, even though they were on our board. But we're trying to come up with a uniform model, even though it is different now. So as far as equity, you guys all do pay the same process, if that makes sense. Whatever was happening in 2020, you pay 50% of what that was. You all do the same inflation rate. It's just that piece of what happens if we are not who we were in 2020 in terms of service. What happens, because that money only goes towards what we already have in existence. So we want to be sustainable, but we also want to be that regional transit entity that has to grow with the needs of the region. And so we're looking for a little bit direction of what can we lean on as we get approached with these conversations. And it has been I would say all but maybe one jurisdiction has approached us wanting to expand with service, and even some of the ones that are sitting on our board.
Reverend Nelson.
So, I mean, we can kind of move past it now, but it really just sounds like the dissemination of information, and then all of us are able to have some conversation about locality. However you split it up, whatever you share with one locality, all of us are getting an opportunity to kind of talk about it, look at it, and share whether or not we think it's equitable, etc. Right? Is that what I heard?
Sorry, I'm not.
I think that if it's regional, like let's just say north-south, and it's going from Chesterfield all the way through Richmond to Enrico, I think that's a totally different discussion than a route that is extended or added in one jurisdiction only. Because if it's just in that jurisdiction and it's because that jurisdiction feels like they need it, they should probably pay 100% of it. If it's something that's a regional route, I think that there needs to be more discussion between all three jurisdictions on what the reasonable amounts are for each jurisdiction to pay to make sure that route is able to function. And that's just where I'm coming from. I don't know.
You said all three.
If it's going through all three jurisdictions, if it's only going to be serving two jurisdictions, then maybe it's a conversation between the two jurisdictions. If it's serving all three, then it's something that we need to have a different conversation about. I think what type of expansion it is.
The challenge is that what we're talking about is huge infrastructure. And we can't be entering into agreements with folk that feel like, okay, this worked for me this year, but next year I'm gonna drop out. We still have the buses. We still have the costs that's associated with it. And that's why I'm saying, and then the process that we're using for funding now is based on a percentage. And, of course, Richmond is the hub of our transit system, and they paid for it all of these years up until just this recent opportunity where we got some regional funding coming in that makes it possible for us to expand beyond. But up until that day, Richmond paid the whole fee. And then when you look at the percentage that when we're doing it on a percentage basis, because of that, where Richmond is, and when we started talking about additional services, it was one thing when we were doing a contract with Henrico. So, even then, if Henrico decided, okay, I'm not doing this contract anymore, we also have to know what that cost is. What are we left with? And when we start talking about regional services and so forth, and when we look at, return on your investment, how many folk are riding, how many miles it takes, I mean, it's a big conversation, and it's one that we should have, no question about it, because Metro Richmond needs to become an efficient regional transportation if we're going to be competitive in the marketplace. We're going to lose out if we don't get to that level, but it is a conversation that we have to make sure that people are ready to buy into and understand the costs.
So I guess to understand, you're saying that the regional conversation would result in a funding model that the region comes up with to support transit being efficient in the region.
They at least have to support. I mean, yes, we can come up with the model, but if the model doesn't finance it.
No, I mean, yeah, the region, the jurisdictions talking about it.
And so we're talking about new money too. So I think ultimately that was my question.
Yes.
So anything that comes forward that is grant funded, when the grant runs out, regardless of what the locality is, if new money is needed for it to continue, I think Councilwoman Robinson and I are saying some of the same thing. We chase the grant money all we want to, but at some point it's going to run out, and then we need to figure out how we will continue to fund that. And right now, because we don't have any other funds of any other sources of income, it falls on localities. So what we're doing right now, we have money for anything that we picking up new. Once the grant cycle runs out, we need to already have a plan. We need to all be on accord. We shouldn't even be chasing grant projects that we don't have an idea of how we're gonna fund it once it's over with. That's just my opinion, because I feel like this is how we're
Well,
gonna
I
get
agree.
we're gonna have a problem at some point getting the expectation up for people to use the service, and then we have to cut it if we don't have money to fund it.
So this is the vehicle at what we were trying to do with this. So this would be for, I'll pick a locality. Goochland has requested a new like they're looking at doing a micro transit zone. In that conversation, they're not in the current 50% amount that was part of legislation. So they're not giving, but they are giving from the CVTA. They also do have a need for, they have no service out there. So they do have a need in this region for service. So do we then, so this is saying, well, hey, Goochland, our model is if you're putting in a new zone, then the request is you apply for a grant, but you pay for the local match of it completely. That's all that is saying. Or this board looks at it from a regional entity. For example, the Goochland will connect to our Route 19. So in terms of DRPT, that is considered regional. There's not probably a defined definition, but you could argue that's regional. And in that instance, going back to what you're saying as a bigger effort, do we say, hey, Goochland, you weren't in the original 3, therefore you aren't already buying in, you have, even though you're giving CVTA, you have to pay 100%. Like, is that the direction that we want to say? And I think that the conversation you're talking about needs to happen to kind of a bigger picture resolve.
It needs to happen every time we have a discussion about actually increasing service and or adding service in anywhere at any time, and what it's going to look like on the backside. Because I mean, honestly, we got a grant in Chesterfield for Route 60, and we put it in and it's running, and I'm not 100% sure that everybody understood that when that grant run out, or as that grant runs out, because it's got step downs in it, what that was going to cost, and having that spelled out in an MOU for everybody that's involved in that piece of the expansion just means that nobody can say they didn't know. Because right now, to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure Chesterfield looked at you and said relatively recently, that's not what our understanding was. And it clarifies the understanding so that neither GRTC nor any locality can say, I didn't know, or I didn't understand, or we're not paying that. I mean, it makes it clear who's paying for it before we make that yes on that expansion.
Well, Chesterfield applied for their own grant. So that was we didn't, GRTC.
And I'm not disputing that, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't have been an expectation. I'm saying that this clarifies, even if a jurisdiction goes for a grant, that grant runs out, what's happening? How is it going to be funded? And there's no questions. It's signed by GRTC. It's signed by the jurisdiction or jurisdictions that need to take on that responsibility. And it clarifies really quickly, this is your responsibility, and everybody that's taken on a responsibility knows it.
And Chesterfield is paying 100% of the match. So that isn't a model that's out, that they applied for the grant and they're paying 100% of the match. And they've done that for 2 years. So that's the model I went off of just as other places approached, but in talking with Barb also, well, it's a step down. So does Chesterfield, we signed a letter of support that we would figure out what happens in the next year together. Does Chesterfield then, we have a letter of support, but not an MOU. Do we then have a percent that this board, that this entity wants to support Chesterfield, or is Chesterfield, because of the new agreement, required to pay 100% because it's a brand new route?
And all of that needs to be clarified, regardless of what we come up with. Every time we expand, we need to have that conversation for whatever the expansion is with anybody and everybody that should be included in the cost of that expansion.
So we're coming forward with grant applications. So all of this is a response to everything you guys have been kind of asking us. So we're coming forward with grant applications, which include 5 operating support grants. And we would like this body to approve them. But in that, we would also, if they're approved or not approved, it should be an MOU with whatever entity might exist to know that, okay, yeah, you might get a grant, you're paying 100% of the match. At the end, you're going to pay 100% of the route, if that's what we end up saying.
I think agreeing on the what, I think there's differentiation on the how. So that, what you just described, I think everyone agrees with that. But I think it's the how that, and y'all said before, these are kind of interim documents. It's like, hey, this is our first idea on how to implement what you're asking for, throwing it at you for the reaction. So also when Bristol had reaction, I think I would look at it and say, again, the wet, because it was so clear. I hope you were recording yourself, but
Someone is.
say it again. But I would say the second part of that is okay, how would we adjust it to maybe even more simplified like that? Because I think to the counselor's point, she highlighted, hey, their investments. I think I mentioned administrative costs. And so that if it is a regional piece where it is benefiting multiple, everybody touches it, makes sense. But if it's just a small piece of folks taking advantage of that and it is and I'm not picking, but a Chesterfield line, then you have that MOU that says, all right, you're taking on the cost for the match independently. And then after you complete that, if you want to complete it, you would supplement that independently. That makes sense. But I think you have other lines of service that the lines are a little more blurry. So what I'm hearing is on the front end, we need to identify those lines of demarcation. Is it a route that we all kind of benefit from versus one that only has a benefit for a single jurisdiction? I think that's where I'm hearing the conversation, and I would agree with that's the line of demarcation.
So I like the idea of regional versus local. Maybe if it's regional, there's some subsidy percent that comes from what we're already funding. And
I think that makes sense.
But I still think having just so that we know what was in place in 2020 and we know that funding formula and that mechanism. Anything that's taking place outside of that, whether it's a regional MOU or a jurisdictional MOU, the whole board should be a part of that decision. And then whoever it is that's a part that is agreed upon needs to be in the MOU so that every segment is
policies and guidelines for each one of them, so that the staff, they have those benchmarks, those guardrails that they're working in. Everybody knows what they are. And, we can always revise things as we go through the process if it's not working for us to accomplish what we need. Or if you have a jurisdiction to come back and say, I know this is your policy, we're asking for a revision to your policy. Well, that's fine, but it comes back to the board to have support that. But at least we know what we've agreed to. The staff knows what we've agreed to, and we can publish that to any organization, any entity, any local government or whatever that wants to participate, but they have their operational guidelines. So in other words, we're not looking at, this is a great regional thing and we are a regional corporation and we don't have any money to pay for it, but they need service. No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, and that's the worst scenario, okay, to emphasize the significance of putting policy in place.
Mr. Chair, I think one of the fundamental things one of the differences in the transition from the start of the CVTA and where we are today is really a huge transition closer to rural transportation than GRTC typically was. I think the system started urban, and because of some of the additional parties that come in, I think looking at the UZA that FTA describes as your urban core, start there, and that's where the feds and the state, the feds have said this is where that urban, that's where it balances. And is there any opportunity for some type of rural arm or some coordination that helps that microtransit and that more deviated type of demand that we need? Because I think we've tried to take on a new role when you are an urban provider. I mean, you are 5307. If you were both, you would be getting the 5311 money. And so either one, we try to get that money in some form, or we have to cut back on some of the rural type things that we do that are eating up what should be on frequency and reliant transportation.
I have had conversations with GRPT about the 5311 because the jurisdictions are eligible and that would just funnel to GRTC. So it is something that's been considered, but the dollars are very limited. Well, I don't know if it is or isn't zero, but yeah, I mean, that was part of the plan, and I have it on, even actually on the sheet with the rural one, is that's an opportunity for funding for support for them later as the grant steps down.
But the harder part though is that, let's say Goochland, they're part of CVTA. And they're paying into the 15% that comes to GRTC. I think New Kent is part of that as well. And so some of them are saying we're funding this through CVTA and we're getting nothing. And that's not 5311 money, but it's money that, to be honest with you, can't, their 15% or their share of that 15% honestly can't fund microtransit.
And it's worth
It can't do it by it can't.
It's worth
But
giving them that back in some form.
To be honest with you, it probably is to
Watch it. That is actually not, it's pretty significant if you look at the percent.
yeah, but at the same time, there's what's it going to cost you if you don't? I mean, I'm just saying that it's worth the conversation, because if I was New Kent or Goochland or somebody that felt like I was paying in, even if it's a minimal amount, and I was getting zero, I would start kicking back, and I think they are at CVTA. I think the CVTA.
Who at this point is getting?
That we don't divert away from the conversation, but the greater Richmond area is a very diverse workforce, and so people transition or use transportation to go from all corners of the community, whether you may park and you may park and ride and save money on your commute, or you may utilize the transit system to go from while you drive into Richmond, you may have meetings and other things, and then you use transit to go to other places. So there are some of those things that we're not discussing that are accurate. I've done it, by the way. And so I think there are some of those things where I wouldn't say people are getting nothing. I think that would be an unfair.
What I can tell you is I believe that those jurisdictions are making that argument, whether it's
But it's true or not. That's right.
might be a different point, but that is their argument.
That's right.
That some of them are making, and I believe that some of them are starting to make that argument at CVTA, which could cause CVTA to start asking more questions about how the dollars are being programmed.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, I'm at CVTA. I'm the chair of CVTA. I'm not really hearing that argument, but I hear it, Jim. I'm not. If it's out there and it's under surface, I'm not hearing it. So
okay, yeah. I've heard some of those grumblings out there. I thought it was at the CVTA meeting, but if you're the chair and you're not hearing it, then I guess that maybe they're not as loud as I thought they were.
Mr. Chair, I want to kind of affirm a lot of the direction of this conversation. I would definitely, per Adrian's comment, caution against looking at the possibility of returning any money. I think that's not sustainable, but Dirona's point is really well taken, right? Let's look at what is GRTC's scope of work in the region, what should it be, what's sustainable? And then to Mr. Donald's point, there's a real necessity for us collectively to tell the value proposition of CVTA. CVTA allows us to build up this level of infrastructure, whether it's improving an interchange, like the Powhatan Parkway project, right? Or it's building up a really reliable, high level of service transit system in urban core where it makes sense, and then reaching some of those other hard to reach areas as well. We've got to be able to have that conversation together as advocates for GRTC to say, so this is kind of what we do. And, you know, sometimes it might feel like you're not getting that direct return on investment, but to Mr. Donald's point, now you have access to all of these things. And that's why we did CVTA in the first place, right?
Hey,
There's a lot.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I think he is, you're good.
All right, yeah, respect, I came on the meeting late. So I know Dyrona, I don't, remind me again who that was just speaking?
Daniel Wagner, sir.
Okay.
The city of Richmond.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, I didn't know who that was, so, okay, thanks.
Okay, fine.
Sure.
So the comments that Jim has had, as we do have conversations with each jurisdiction, and we meet also with admin and board, they have made those comments, just so you know. I don't know, maybe it's a conversation need to happen more at the CVTA level, but they have,
Yeah, then
right.
they're spitting in the wind, they talking in the wrong place, but you can go say anything you want on the corner or social media. If you ain't saying it where it needs to be said, then you aren't saying anything.
Yeah, but they will.
Right.
Well, I'm just bringing up the fact that I'm hearing those grumblings from some of the jurisdictions that are on the periphery, that there's concerns coming from them. That's all I was sharing.
So I think we recognize the fact that we need to put some tools in place to effectively build and continue to build on a regional plan. I don't think that we should, some things are going to be, maybe it's just one whatever that's going to Goochland. But it may be the beginning of the foundation of building a larger system eventually when people begin, you get something going and people start seeing the benefit, and you may ultimately have the opportunity to build on it. But there's a lot of work that has to be done because like you said, Jim, whether you take it to the board where it's supposed to be or it's just noise in the street, it only takes some of our news reporters to have an opportunity to tell their story, right? And then it's a one-sided, doesn't make any sense story. I don't know that we're ready to have this kind of discussion at the board level. I think that what we have right now is just, you've done the work that we asked you to do. You've created some frameworks for us to start having that consideration. And I think we need to figure out how we can best work with this, start with this, and see where we can get it to a place that we're answering all of these tough questions that we've brought up this afternoon.
But I think that this is a great start, but there should be two of them, a single jurisdiction responsibility and a multi-jurisdiction responsibility.
And I like the regional versus the metropolitan
Right.
concept. And so I think all of those things, we should weigh them, and maybe there's a special meeting, task force or something that we really just spend time, be in that worst case scenario, putting those things on the table. So we're kind of troubleshooting it to come up with something that would be really building on that foundation of our regional system that we want to see happen.
One thing I would add, because I think y'all got to the place and y'all did a much better job of explaining it than I did. But that's what I'm talking about when I said the equality version versus the equity version. One version, what you have now, you're pretty close to. If it is a single municipality, then it's that direct pay. You take on the match as well as carry the cost after. But then that other version where it would include the other jurisdictions and everybody can see what you pay, what you do, what your responsibilities are. is that second version when you're talking about two. I think that's both of them. It is one that's very close to what you have here, but then there's another one where how do we all contribute? What is the joint burden if we continue when the grant is over? And also what's the joint match to get it started? I think those two things will help us get to the finish line. So
I think you're halfway there.
you're close.
I will take that, we'll take that. I feel like finance committee is the right.
I think I don't have a problem with having that discussion here because ultimately it all comes back to money and that's this committee. I mean, I don't have a problem with it being here. If we want to have another task force that works as a part of this committee, as a direct task force just on that, I don't have a problem with that, but ultimately, this is probably the right committee to try to figure out how people are gonna pay for something.
I'm happy to do the legwork and just keep bringing it.
You just wanted those MOUs back. I got you.
Just
I'm gonna say just one more time that we are hearing the exact comment whenever we meet with them directly, and it is from individuals who sit on that board. So just have an idea as far as how that is handled, because that will, as we come with proposals and it's 100%, and they come back and say, we're giving X, Y, and Z, just prepare to Y. As you guys have those conversations.
All right, well, we went a little long. We missed items 7 and 8, but I think that unless anybody else has any new business or anything else to discuss, we'll put 7 and 8 to the next meeting and we will adjourn.
Well, we'll provide an update on the budget prep Tuesday.
Okay.
That's simple, yes.
All right, so we'll get that anyway. So,
Yes.
does anybody else have anything else? Or are we good with going ahead and moving to adjourn?
Merry Christmas.
All right, Merry Christmas.